Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we're going to be talking about maybe what to do, what to try, or sharing experiences on joining a mob that's maybe not doing other good things from extreme programming or retrospectives or any of these things that you may believe that are really good for a team, and you show up on a team and it's surprising, and so maybe to kick it off, Chris, have you ever encountered a situation like that where you join a team or a team starts mobbing and you notice these things?
So it's pretty interesting because, I think that whenever I encounter kind of mobbing at a mobbing meetup or something, you hear it kind of always tied into extreme programming and radical candor and retros and other things like that, right? Just kind of the culture, even lean, right, for example. But I do think that there are teams out there that are just mobbing, but not doing those things. And so and it's a pretty interesting concept. But I want to kind of talk about when we first started mobbing for the first time. This would be kind of like 11 years ago or so for me. The team back then wasn't doing test-driven development. The team was maybe learning about it. They had implemented a Kanban board maybe 3 to 6 months before, but everything was still very waterfall, and it was kind of taking a look at a project together that had been in development for a year and a half and was stalled. And so that's just kind of like an interesting, it's part of the kind of origin of like, good practices made their way into the system because we had retros and we had learning sessions, the virtuous loop, so to speak. But yeah, mobbing there there was definitely like, a kind of popcorn of ideas and things along those lines that had come up. And then another place that I've seen this is at meetups that are not Agile related, right? And so you might go to specifically a language meetup or something like a Python group, and people would start mobbing in the sense that it's like, hey, let's get around the computer and start writing Python. But then there's like no unit test. Like they're discussing an algorithm, right? Not a pure TDD system. And then I also think that there are different interpretations of mobbing from the community at large. And so I think often people try mobbing even without any of the other practices, because they've heard like, oh, mobbing is a thing where you all get together around the same computer. And the absence of extreme programming or any of those other things are in there, but they still try it. So those are some things that I've seen, and they're pretty interesting. But how about you, Austin?
Yeah. Maybe before I get into my experiences, so I think one of the things that is interesting about this situation is like, what do you do about it? You know what I mean? So what did you find yourself doing in those situations to, I guess, help the team move in a positive direction?
So extreme programming in general, I think is kind of hard to get to, especially for people with like a traditional computer science education. Because I've had professors at college tell me like unit tests are for kind of idiots and stuff like that. Like I've heard that sort of thing before. It's like, or thinking algorithmically, or like, what's the big O notation of this algorithm? Your unit test doesn't mean anything to me. And while there's like some validity to that with the idea of like computational complexity is important sometimes, there was definitely blinders on there, and so but even like taking a step back from TDD, it's like solid principles, grasp principles, or functional design at all. You get this weird effect of like, okay, where is the incremental improvement to the team's skills? And so I think one of the big things that was really great when we were first mobbing is I don't think anybody on the team had seen a model view controller pattern before, and they were working in ASP forms. And so, because no one was comfortable using the MVC framework, we kind of, I put together an example of a fake MVC framework in ASP forms that then got people kind of like, oh, this is interesting. This is still ASP forms, but it's it's using this new pattern. And so none of that was unit tested, but the main thing was like just illustrating. You have an opportunity in a mob to illustrate things that people just didn't know existed. And I find that that's a lot of the time just the barrier is like the awareness is just not there. And so I find that, so mobbing, like, it's like even just learning the shortcuts, like people are mobbing, like, oh, what did you do there? A lot of that is just kind of a launch pad for incremental improvements. And but I also know that I'm somebody that's very comfortable playing the long game, and so I'm for impatient people, I think that it's very hard to deal with that. And so a lot of the time, I think in the past, in all of those situations, I think I started with can we get keyboard shortcuts under control? And then from there, if people are not really typing at like, maybe 50 words a minute, there was a time in the early mobbing period where we were just playing typing games during our learning session, because it was like, hey, let's just get our typing speed up and avoid hunting and pecking. We put cardboard over people's keyboards at times too. And then it was like, okay, well, from the typing speed and the keyboard shortcuts, like, there's some solid design principles, and even just decoupling, like even just taking one of the grasp principles, like, so loosely coupled, right? So it doesn't even have to be highly cohesive. That thing can be over there and that thing can be over there, but let's just decouple things. And so, it was just a gradual incremental improvement, and it was like the smallest possible change, and just trying to inch a little bit toward better all the time. And how can we deliver this a little bit faster? How can we make sure that this thing is not going to break that thing a little bit easier? And so I think initially it's just starting with a lot of tricks, like, oh my gosh, like, we're in a JetBrains IDE for the first time, and I hit double shift and I found this shortcut, or alt enter, and like, oh, that was amazing, like, how did that method appear? It can be mind-blowing, but the that's assuming that there's somebody in there that can kind of show something new and interesting, and then the team is motivated enough to onboard that. But I see that, right? So like if I'm at a meetup and no one's unit testing, right, like I'm not worried about that they're not unit testing, because there's probably something else even like more earlier than that. So it'll typically be either a solid principle or a grasp principle, and I'll just be like, hey, did you know you could do this thing? Or I run into a lot of software developers that don't know what interfaces are, like as far as like no implementation interface, like kind of the C# definition of an interface. And just introducing to that, like people to that, is and in the early days of mobbing, there was even kind of like a homework thing of like, hey, everybody go home and study interfaces. Is that something we should know? But yeah, very incremental, very slow, and comfort with playing the long game. I think that's and there are definitely environments that that have interviews that filter for that, and so there's also that. But I think any group of developers could be mobbing and move forward, as long as the virtuous loop exists. Because if it doesn't exist, then you're kind of doomed to continue the same repetitive behavior forever. And so that's kind of where my thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with the vision of coming into it with the long game. And I think what I'm about to share on is maybe the chaotic process to get there for some people, including myself. So I think for whatever reason, there is this kind of utopia view of mobbing. Like you show up in a mob, oh, if they're ensemble programming, then they're, they have lean system thinking and they're doing extreme programming. They're probably releasing to production, like, I don't know, every 5 minutes, whatever, like the expectations are crazy high. And so what I've seen before in my own personal experience, and also heard a couple of stories from others, is there was one time where I came into an ensemble, and it was overwhelming because it was like, I see like 50 things that seem pretty bad to me, right?
Yeah.
And emotionally, it's like, what do you do with that, right? Your hair catches on fire in front of everyone, and you throw a tantrum in front of the mob. Like, you can't do that, right? And so what do you do to process through that?
There's a new mobbing role. The mobbing role is just cry in the corner, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, the weeping and gnashing of teeth role. There you go. Yeah. So how do you, in one sense, emotionally process through that? And I think I have a couple of things. One is get therapy, so to speak, right? Like you need someone to talk to work through it, to brainstorm, to figure out, like, how do I take the 50 things I'm seeing and, like you said, play the long game, like, listen to some reggae music, and when you come into the mob and be like, okay, there's 50 things that are wrong, but I think the most important thing is this, so let me gently introduce that, right? Yeah. And so to get there, at least for me, it was finding someone who could, like, so to speak, coach me while I'm with this team, right? And so I'd be like, okay, help me figure this out. I'm seeing X. Just like throwing the wall like stickies. Like, here are all the things I'm seeing. Help me figure out what's the next best move to take with this team, right? And so
and a big anti-pattern there is slamming a team with everything they're doing wrong, right?
Right.
So I definitely, I've seen that behavior before, where people are like, whoa, you guys are not doing this, and this, and that's like, so the Esther Derby, Don Gray, center, enter, turn thing that I mentioned before, that's like a big piece of it. But I think in general, if you come up with so much feedback, it's overwhelming for you're going to be ejected from the team, especially if you're brand new to the team. You'll just destroy any reputability with the people that are there for a long time. And I think back to my experiences in similar situations, and I think often again, very patient, but I think often it was just like, everybody's at their own place in their learning journey, and having that mentality had been really good. And I've definitely run into people that, it's like, I only hire senior people because I can't deal with more junior people. Like it just won't work for me, and that sort of thing just exists in the system. But I think, regardless of skill level, it's like, what have you been exposed to over your career? And I think it's getting a lot better lately, because I think schools have started teaching more XP practices, like universities have, or even just like, design patterns and things like that. Like, I've seen master's courses and even some bachelor level stuff that talks about design patterns. At the very least, it's just alerting people that they exist. And so, you kind of, the first thing you want to do is, like, if you want to be on the team, try not to alienate them. Like, I mean, that's like the number one thing you start off with. And then from there, it's like, again, it will be gradual incremental improvement. But, and I think that a lot of teams can get to better than most teams very quickly. Like, you can pass the median maybe very quickly, like within a matter of years of like people just kind of studying one thing after the other. But there needs to be a desire to do that on the team, right? And kind of like endless complacency is like definitely not a place that you want a team to be.
Right. Yeah. And I think I totally agree. And that you don't want to overwhelm them. Yeah. You don't want to hit them with the 50 things. And so what, for me, it was find someone to talk to so that I can talk through the 50 things and get it out. Right. and then also have an outlet. So like if I'm with the team and mobbing, and let's say I see 5 things that don't, but I don't want to say all 5 things right now in this moment, is I'll literally write them down and then add them to a Kanban board and be like, okay, I'm going to reconsider that one later. Maybe I'll save that one for later. But right now, here is the one thing I'm going to try to help them with. So it's like, I have the ideas, have them get out into a second brain, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and, do you know what you're describing right now?
Please use
it's red-green refactor for the team.
Right.
So
yeah.
so you know the team is green when you encounter it.
Yeah.
You're about to introduce a change, so even just letting them know, like, hey, Alt Enter exists in this JetBrains ID, and people are like, boom, right? And then you have to get the test passing, like everybody starts using it, practicing it, and then you're green, right? And then the refactoring is like, how did your process change, right? And then, you know, over time, and like just digesting, right? There needs to be a digestion period, because one thing that I think people do is just like introduce one thing after the other without, you know, so you have like the storming and forming, but no norming, right? And so like, you know, you have this change on the team that is like, you know, and so compounding that over time can also be destructive. And so it's like, it's the red-green refactor for the team.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree, because you do need, like you said, you need to incrementally, you know, do it little by little. And each thing, it's not like as soon as someone first, you know, using the Alt Enter, oh, one person did it, okay, here's the next thing, here's my second thing on the Kanban to teach them or show them, you know, or to suggest to change. And it doesn't even come, you're not even coming into the mindset like, I know everything and, you know, I'm going to come in and teach them. It's more just like, oh, I see something that could be better and it's worth a discussion, you know, at least. And so
that's a really good point.
Yeah,
I think in those scenarios, making a big deal out of things that you learn from them as well is right. So if it's a reciprocal relationship, it is much better than like being, you know, the coach in the room, or like, you know, always the person with some critical feedback about how the team's. So you know, I think back to those early days as well. I basically had zero domain knowledge, and there were people there that had years and years of domain knowledge. And so it was like, wow, that was such a good discovery, or such a, you know, such a great input that like we can continue to, you know. And so I do think that, you know, emphasizing without patronizing is a really strong activity for anything that you can kind of just pull from the group of like, okay, this is like a thing that we can discover together. Or if somebody reveals a problem, maybe they're embarrassed, even embarrassed about it, but like being like, oh wow, like that, this is a really great opportunity for all of us. And, you know, just kind of you know, throwing out compliments anytime you can around things that, you know, they might seem like they come naturally, but still, you know, anything that kind of can be considered a solid contribution. Because I think one thing that teams really should have is essentially a focus of like, especially in ensemble work, is if you're in an ensemble, you might lose kind of like personal ownership of like the code being developed by the mob, but you have total ownership over your contributions to improve the mob. And so so I think that you know, a big thing is that whenever there's a solid contribution to improve the mob, that recognition for that goes out, and that can then start kind of sparking you know, kind of a compounding effect of like, you know, because really what the behavior that I think you ultimately want is a passion for improving the work, the ability for the team to do their work, and you want to instill that in others. And so kind of noting that whenever that occurs, especially outside of you personally, is a really great way of getting the team kind of rolling on that on their own, without having you to have that all the time. And then you can always use learning time to kind of virtuous loop the thing. And some of the best victories there, I think, are you did a, you know, so like mobbing started because one of the team members was coming to the learning sessions and doing katas and was saying, I'm stuck on my project, and can we go into a conference room like we do with the katas, but let's just work on our real work together like that. And it was like, okay, yeah, let's all go do that. That sounds great. And it was very safe. It was kind of like treated almost as a learning activity, but it became doing all the real work together all the time. So it was a really great outcome.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's super key to all this. And it's tough. And this is why coaching in any realm, or, learning in any realm, was really hard, is that, you have all these ideas firing in your head. But then you also got to keep in mind the interpersonal aspect of it. And so I think, like you said, part of the digestion is not just you hitting the team with more and more improvements every 5 seconds, right? And so being transparent, like you said, right? Like, someone else on the team is really skilled in X and you're not, say that. Like, I don't know, can you help, teach this? I would really like to learn this while we're working on this problem, right? And so that will naturally lead to, like, wow, that really helped us. Thank you. You know what I mean? And like acknowledging it, like you said, without patronizing, right? Because, with any of these interpersonal things, there's always a twisted version of it that feels really manipulative, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're not coming into it with a good heart where you're actually learning from someone else, they'll see it, and it probably won't be effective, because people can pick up on that kind of stuff. And then I think in a non-manipulative way, kind of build up that emotional capital, right? Where it is a relationship where we're both learning and teaching from each other, right? And so, if you accomplish a task together, even if 49 out of the 50 things you want to improve weren't done in it, you can still celebrate the good part of that, right? And acknowledge the good parts of it, and take the sponsor role and celebrate it and amplify someone's voice while you were solving that problem. And those kind of things can really help build up, so that when you do say, hey, I noticed what we were doing early in the morning was this. What do you guys think about trying this experiment? They're more open to hear the idea, as opposed to from like an outside voice that they don't know, or someone who doesn't seem to care about what they bring to the team, right? So yeah.
Well, coming up on time here, so
Yep.
I'll just ask the audience, have you ever mobbed without doing XP, RadCan, retrospectives? What was that experience like? Did it bother you kind of viscerally, or was there something interesting about it? Or maybe you experienced a lot of turnover on your team, and people come in, they start mobbing, but they don't really have a lot of the background, and they're all new people. Like, that's definitely a possibility in the software environment. So tell us about it in the comments. We'd love to hear about that. And, share this episode with anybody that you think might be going through this right now, and like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.